Unlike the past 2 weeks when we've been reading the Anglo-Saxon English and Norman uh, Norman English or Anglo-Norman English, you'll start to recognize that this week the writing is more familiar to you in that it looks more like modern day English. You can actually read some of the words for what they are. Um, so I want to take a little bit of time just to talk a little bit about the birth of Middle English because it is so important to us, to you and me, because it's the language that we speak. So if you'll remember from the previous video, Chaucer lived and wrote at the end of the Middle Ages, and like we said, this was a time of fantastic, tremendous social, political, economical change. It was also a tremendous time for linguistic change. Things were changing linguistically. Dictionaries, that as we know them today, didn't exist at this time, and while the British culture was a written culture, unlike the days of the Anglo-Saxons when they were still very much oral, so to speak. Most of the people who were literate in Chaucer's day were the members of the clergy and aristocracy. So during the Middle Ages, in this span of about 350 years since the Norman invasion, the English language evolves and changes. And the most significant of these changes happen from the bottom up. If you think back to that feudalistic pyramid and the peasantry being on the bottom, that's where the language changes happens. It happens at the bottom of that pyramid, the peasantry. Chaucer wrote in Middle English, and that really, like I said, is a precursor to the language that we speak today. And Middle English comes to us as a result of the Norman conquest, with um, as the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons interact together for the first time. Middle English is essentially the love child of unlikely marriages between the Anglo-Saxons and the Norman French. The Anglo-Saxon era ends with the Battle of Hastings, and firm in his belief that he was the rightful king of England, William the Conqueror didn't want to eliminate the Anglo-Saxons, but instead wanted to rule over them. Um, as a result of the conquering of the Anglo-Saxons, we have a ton of single Anglo-Saxon women, these war widows, and we also have a lot of Norman soldiers. And in a society where a cohesive family unit was essential for survival, these two groups married. So we have our Norman French soldier, our Anglo-Saxon woman, and children as a result, because communication is key to any good relationship. Children spoke a combination of the two. Remember, we don't have things like schools and books to teach people how to interact or to how to speak at this moment of time. So it's like being immersed in a culture, in learning how to communicate that way. So anyways, children spoke a combination of both Anglo Saxon English and Norman French. And over the span of generations, the two languages become one. They become Middle English. So, to illustrate my point, I'd like to look at something like the Lord's Prayer in modern English. And you guys are familiar with it, but it reads as, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Now I'd like for us to look at it in Anglo-Saxon, and I cannot speak Anglo-Saxon as well as the recording, so take a listen.
Ure, thu de erton hefonum. See the name ye halwood. Toby cometh the risha, ye wortheth in willa on earthen swaswa on hefonum. Erne ye die walikum laf silachus to die, and for yivus jure yiltus, swaswa way for yiveth jurum yildendum. Enelea to oos on kustungen, akalius ufuvilla, sothlicher.
All right, so you can recognize that it sounds Father Ura, right? Heavenum. All of these words that kind of sound familiar or like akin to the words that we use. Now, I would like for you guys to consider the Lord's Prayer in Norman French. And I do not speak Old French. So take a listen to the recording.
Le nostre Père, qui êtes aux cieux, sanctifiez les tuns nuns. Advienne de tuns regnes, siet faite la tue volonté, si comme au ciel et en la terre. Notre pain quotidien donne-nous-le, et pardonne à nous de nos dettes, et c'est comme nous pardonnons à nos détours. Et nous ne mènes en tentation, mais délivre-nous de mal. Amen.
If you look at the words in this Anglo, or not Anglo, but Norman French for the Lord's Prayer, it looks an awful lot like Latin. And the Norman French is essentially a regional dialect of Latin. And any of the Romance languages, Romance meaning Rome, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, French, all of those begin as regional dialects of Latin. So remember back, way back, before the Anglo-Saxons even invade England, the Romans lived there. So the Romance languages of the French, right, have a significant impact on the evolution of modern day English. And if you take a look, we've seen the Lord's Prayer in Anglo-Saxon, we've heard it in Anglo-Norman, or not Anglo-Norman, I don't know why I keep calling it Anglo-Norman, but in Norman French. Marry those two together and you get the Lord's Prayer in Middle English. So take a listen.
Ure Father, that art in heavenus, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come tau, be thy will done in earth as in heaven. What thou us this day, ure bread, and for what thou us ure debtors, as we for wine thou ure debtors, and lead us not until temptation, who deliver us from evil. Amen.
So that sounds a lot like the Lord's Prayer that I read. However, I hope that by listening to the Lord's Prayer in Anglo-Saxon and in Norman French, you can hear some of the similarities that are found in the Middle English. And of course, the Middle English is where we get our modern day version of English. So I can hear you guys in your brain saying, oh my gosh, this is so freaking boring. So what? Who cares? Well, I will tell you that you should care because it's the language you speak. Don't believe me? Well, take a look at the 100 most common English words. The, he, or, about, no, now, work, me, there, we, her, she, it, right? All of these things that, because, these words that you use regularly when you're communicating day in and day out are Anglo-Saxon, they come from they're Anglo-Saxon words, right? They are these short, plain, functional words that these that originate from Anglo-Saxon. What about the Norman French? Well, if you look at the words you use when you want to impress, when you want to sound sophisticated, the flowery words to kind of gussy up our speech, those are Anglo-Norman in nature. They're long, they're luxurious, they're ornamental. They're the words that you want to use when you add sophistication or want to sound smart when you either write or talk. So, to further illustrate my point, I would like for you guys to imagine this scenario, and I'm going to present it in the guise of a date night. Two people meet, and one asks another, "Can I take you to dinner?" "Sure. May I inquire where we're going to go?" Right? Ask is Anglo-Saxon in nature. Inquire, Norman French. These are words we use every day. Imagine that these two have decided to go on a date. They're sitting at a table. It's very romantic, talking in quiet voices. The one, he's really, really nervous, so he starts to sweat. Right? Well, the fairer sex, women, don't sweat. We perspire, right? So they're nervous. They either sweat or they perspire. Anglo-Saxon, Norman French. They're getting hungry. They ask to see a menu. "I think I'll have the pig." Don't you mean pork? How about cow? You mean beef? Chicken? No. Poultry. Sheep? Don't you mean mutton? Calf? No. Veal. And so on and so forth. So if you look, I mean, these words that we use every day come from, well, not every day. I don't use these words on a regular basis, but they come from us, from Anglo-Saxon and Norman French. Why else is this important, and how does this kind of relate to Chaucer, right? Our linguistic ancestors, the richness and complexity of the language we speak today begins in the homes and fields of the English medieval peasantry. That's right. A debt of gratitude, because that's where we get our language from. And just like we owe them a debt of gratitude, so too does Geoffrey Chaucer. Let me explain a little bit further, because if you go to any college library and you ask for a Russian dictionary, that dictionary is only going to contain 150,000 words. And I know you're thinking, well, I couldn't think to use 150,000 words, right? But we're limited, or the Russian language is limited to that many words. If you ask for a French dictionary, it's going to give you a few more words, but only like 30,000 more. The most, there are only 180,000 words in the French language. But if you were to ask to see an Oxford English dictionary, the most complete and comprehensive English dictionary that there is, I mean, there's volumes of them, there are over 600,000 words in the English language. So essentially, English has more ways to say things than any other language on the planet. So when we acknowledge the literary genius that is Geoffrey Chaucer, we can recognize that he is an immensely skilled and educated man, which meant he knew Latin, he knew French, he knew all of these other languages, but he chooses to write in what would have been considered the language of the common man, right? And that's the language that is exploding in size when he's writing. That doesn't mean that he uses more words, but rather he has more words to choose from. And simply put, like I said, for a man who could write in any language that he wanted to, he could write in that of the learned aristocracy or the learned clergy. He chooses to write in the vernacular language of the common folk. And because of that, I mean, he's writing in the most largest and vibrant of languages in the medieval world. So that is the evolution of I mean that's Middle English in a nutshell, the language of the peasants, but it's also the most vibrant, and that's where we get our modern day English together, and that's why it's so important to us as um, students in this class. But I mean, I think it's important to know the roots of the language that you speak. So we will pick up in the next video talking about the Canterbury Tales and the general prologue.